Hi, everyone, and welcome to Left Unattended, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on what it really means to be neurodivergent in the workplace. I'm your host, Ron Sosa, and together we'll explore the stories that often go untold, like the experiences, the challenges, and the wins that shape how we show up at work, whether the systems around us were ready or not. Today's guest I'm super excited for is Jessica Poli. She's a licensed veterinary technician, regional operations manager, and an award-winning veterinary leader whose leadership journey was built through lived experience, resilience, and relentless determination. The first in her immediate family to graduate high school and college, a survivor of domestic violence, and a single parent while stepping into leadership. Jessica rose through every role in veterinary medicine, from the kennel to senior leadership. Diagnosed as neurodivergent in adulthood, she now leads with greater self-awareness and intention, redefining how leaders hold space for themselves. Named Veterinary Technician of the Year in 2023, Jessica continues to practice clinically when able to stay grounded in her why. She believes leadership isn't reserved for the confident or the polished. It's for anyone willing to grow, to heal, and to lead with humanity, because where we start does not determine how far we can lead. Oh, hi, and welcome, Jessica Poli. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. We just recently connected, a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
And I just enjoyed talking with you. And, part of that was doing some market research in what I'm working on in my coaching. But I really loved part of the stories that you were sharing and ideas. And so I'd love for you to give the audience kind of a background of who you are, where you got, how you got here, and then kind of your story of neurodivergence, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. And it's funny how many people you meet on LinkedIn. It's such a small world in the veterinary industry. And we always say that, but it really is. And I started in this industry as a technician. So I'm an LVT. And I was thrown into management, as many of us are, via that sink or swim model, and I'm still here. So exactly. I, throughout my journey, discovered a passion for leadership, and I now work in and have worked in regional leadership roles for the last several years, and it's something that fills my cup because I get to learn just as much as I get to teach, and so it's something that there's never a dull moment, and no 2 days are the same, which my technician brain appreciates. I think for me too, learning that I was neurodivergent, I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. And it's interesting to see how many people in this industry, or just in general, go undiagnosed for so long, but how those intricacies actually impact what we do on our day to day. So it's been a journey for me, and it was exciting to see, you and the work that you're doing. And it's intriguing, to say the least, and I'm excited to keep learning, because it is a learning process for sure.
Yeah, it definitely is. I know similar parallels in the sense of getting a late diagnosis. Like I got my ADHD diagnosis in my mid-20s and an ASD diagnosis in my late 30s. And so what has been the most profound difference that you have awareness of now getting a diagnosis? Like what's been that difference for you?
That's a great question. And there's so many, but I think the most impactful is probably the way in which I work. It's not something that I ever realized was different until I was diagnosed and I started diving into things. And so just the hyperfixation in areas where I can hyperfixate on one project, and I can get it done within a day rather than, the month it might take other people, depending on what it is. But then the small, mundane day-to-day tasks are those things I can't complete. I just don't want to, or they're just not as exciting. And so, I think the way in which I work, I didn't realize, that constant go, 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 and that need to just be doing something, whether or not it's what I'm supposed to be doing, or I'm getting down a rabbit hole that kind of is a deeper dive into the original project. But I think that's been both eye-opening and also humbling, and a reminder that I don't have to do those things, and that I can set boundaries for myself. I think that fear of rejection a lot of us have. I know that that's a factor that plays into it a lot too. And so giving myself some grace, that the rabbit hole, while they're productive, it's also something that I can set a boundary with, and I can also hold that for myself too, and others. is something I've learned to do too.
Yeah, I love that. It's oftentimes I tell people that, sometimes in 1 week I can accomplish everything I need to accomplish probably in 2 days. But the other 3 days I like crash really hard. Do you find those fluctuations in your energy as well?
I do. And something that I recently started within probably just the last 6 months, so it hasn't been long, although I will say it's been an incredible change for me, is managing my schedule in a way that works for my brain. So I used to have back-to-back meetings all day, every day, and there was no rhyme or reason, right? So I have meetings that other people own, meetings that I own, and it just did not work for my brain. I felt like I was always behind. I couldn't catch up. I couldn't focus on what was going on because I had other things to do. And so restructuring my calendar in a way that allows me to have a slow morning. I can dive into the data. I can do what I need to do. I can answer my inbox. And then midday, we're rocking and rolling. And then from there, it just kind of flows. So I think managing my schedule, it's been huge.
Yeah, it's something I talk about. I have a workbook that I put out into the world called What's Left Unattended. And it is definitely one of the exercises I really push a lot of my coaching clients through. I want people to do that because it makes such a difference. And there's no one size fits all. Everybody's like, well, how do I structure my calendar? There's no way to structure a calendar.
No.
Like, let's work with your natural rhythm, right? And so sometimes it needs to switch up every month or every other month because your rhythm may change or the novelty wears off or whatever. It's like the person who gets the new planner all the time and they're like, I don't just need a new planner. I was like, it's okay if you do, right? Like if you
I have all the new planners I don't use after day one, but guess what? They're there and they help in the moment.
Right. If it helps in the moment, then use it. But I'm curious, that it's prescriptive, but like how best do you set up your calendar? How did you figure it out from an energy standpoint, how to best set up your calendar?
Yeah, so for me, my brain works best if I can walk into a meeting understanding what we need to accomplish, what might be a takeaway from the week previous and things that were left undone. And having all of that information going into my meeting just sets the tone for my day. And so for me, it's really, my morning is a good hour to 2 hours, depending on the day, of getting all of the tasks from the previous day or the previous week. And then from there, meeting prep, meeting prep, meeting, and so on and so forth. And then the end of the day, I also have strategic blocks here and there to make sure that I'm getting any tasks from that day that need to be done completed. And it's weird to finish the day without a to-do list longer than my grocery list for the week. So but to your point though, it does change sometimes month to month or week to week. And so, end of year, we all know is end of year. And the chaos hits. So I think also to your point, remembering that it doesn't have to be one set schedule, and reminding myself even that it can be flexible and it should be flexible.
I think one of the things we did with my team was we really tried. We've been slacking on this lately. We've got a smaller team. We went from 11 people down to about 4 or 5 right now with the team I'm on, and so it's a little bit less of a situation because we don't have as many meetings. But when we had 11 people and we had projects, and we're all in different projects, and we're trying to figure things out, like we had to 30-minute meetings, 5-minute buffer in between. Hour meetings, 10-minute buffer in between. And that means the top and the bottom of the hour or the half hour. And then, so if I've got a back-to-back 30-minute meeting, then I've got 10 minutes to decompress, to grab water, to pee, to be
not enough.
Being, right? It doesn't even matter what my brain needs, but it's just to be a human being because we've just got needs. I can't sit here in this chair for 8 hours a day, although sometimes I try.
And then we crash and burn at the end of it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's such a good point, because what I find, and I'm curious to your thoughts on this, is that the cognitive load of what we do is so high. We dismiss it because of what we should be getting done. We have these shoulda, coulda, wouldas in our head of, I need to be able to, my job requires me to sit at this desk for 8 hours a day. And then we sit at this desk 8 hours a day. And then we can't even greet our family. We're so exhausted. And it has nothing to do about the work itself. It's that cognitive load of doing something against what your body actually needs.
Yeah, it's that, and I think too the masking and the showing up, how someone else needs you to. I was in a mentor group recently, and one of the takeaways is, not treating people how you want to be treated, but treating them how they want to be treated. And I think that's true too. When we're showing up in meetings, I for one team have to show up in a way that is going to appeal to them. And it's not that it's not me, but it's just a different set of verbiage, a different, set of approaches. And so doing that too all day, every day, when you don't have that time to decompress, you don't realize until you take a step away from that and you kind of reprioritize your day and the mask that you have to wear. You don't realize how much of a toll it takes until you take that big picture look, which is humbling.
It's so true, because leadership in general asks you to wear a little bit of a mask, just like across the board, everyone. You've got to be able to put on a little bit of a show, or at least maybe the outdated system of leadership is like, put on a show. You've got to keep your cool. You can never, like, you've got to have all the answers or whatnot. And just that masking alone, and on top of the intersectionalities of neurodivergence or being female or whatever, like that cognitive load just keeps stacking. And the exhaustion at the end of the day is just absolutely awful. And it's totally a part of well-being and the mental health picture. We're just not talking about in vet med, and I'm hoping to spread that across all of our colleagues, because it's really important.
It is, and I think in a leadership role now, and honestly, that's why I pursued a potential diagnosis, because it was to a point where I knew that I needed something, and I didn't know what it was, but it had been suggested to me by a couple of colleagues in the industry who also have ADHD, and they're like, what, I don't think that's normal. You should have that evaluated, because I think you're functioning at a different level. And I did, and sure enough, I was diagnosed. But I think looking back, even as a technician, I came into a practice where I was the only LVT, and I was training everybody. And so I remember times where I'm in the surgical suite and I have my checklist lined up, my catheters lined up, I have my system, and if someone moved something out of place, the entire day was over. But looking back and realizing that wasn't necessarily a function of the burden I was, carrying in terms of being a technician, but it was that executive function piece of I had to have everything a certain way, and if I didn't, I lost my place. And so, ironically enough, I actually had there was a colleague in the industry who ran into a similar situation, and she was really frustrated because she was on the other end where she tried to help someone, set up their day before they got there, and it threw them off completely. And their response was not what they anticipated, which, is rough, because she was trying to mend fences elsewhere, and it just backfired. And so talking through it with her too, having been on both sides of that scenario, it was eye-opening for both of us. And so I think even outside of leadership, there's so many people in this industry who just don't realize that, that frustration and honestly the burnout, it's not necessarily always coming even from the patient care and the patient load, which is wild, because that's not something, that we really think about either. But I think that a good portion of it comes from that too.
Yeah, it's so, I find it, perspective is always fascinating to me, right? So you've got the outside of vet med, people think that euthanasia is like the biggest burnout cause for veterinarians, technicians, veterinary professionals, etc. And then you come inside vet med, and we're like, well, it's the clients, and they can't afford the care, and we know we can treat the pet, right? And then there's this perspective where it's like there's still some holes or still some flashlight that we need to shine a light on. And to me, that's the masking and the authenticity piece for neurodiversity. And the same goes to other marginalized groups. Like there are other people who are, masking, code switching, camouflaging, whatever you want to use for other minority groups or marginalized groups. It's the same thing. It's that cognitive load. It's that trying to fit in. And for me, I'm part of the LGBTQ community as a gay man who's hard of hearing and who's got ADHD and ASD. And so it was just a complete compounding effect that when I was completely burned out in early 2020, which I thought was the pandemic was the issue. That was not the issue at all. The issue is how heavily masking I was about all of it. And no one knew the real me at any point in time. And that was just such a realization.
It's a struggle. And, to a point you made earlier, leadership in itself kind of comes with that underlying, you have to present yourself a certain way and, with certain tones and all of the things. And that is something that to a degree, I dropped this last year. And it was, and I don't even remember, what the topic was, but I remember the exact manager I was on a call with. And I looked at her and I finally just said, you know what? This sucks. Like there was no, whatever we were going through at the time. I said, you know what? You're right. This is hard and it's not fun. And I'm not going to tell you it's fun. I'm not going to tell you that in 6 months it's going to be fun. But here we are.
Yes.
Let's struggle best together. I don't know everything. You don't know everything. Let's just figure it out. And it's incredible to look back at the relationships I was able to build over the last year. And there was, a learning curve, and letting that wall down. You have to be really cautious with holding those boundaries, because sometimes, it does open the floodgate for, a bit of a gray area. But if you keep communication open, it was amazing what that did for my mental health. And honestly, I think me and the teams, we were so much more productive because we were just people. We were just ourselves, and we all had the ability, to show up as we were. I had one of my managers, and if she ever watches this, she's gonna laugh hysterically because she'll know who she is. But she hung up on me mid-call. She's like, Jessica, I can't. I'm done. This is not the conversation I can have today. And the next day came back to me. She's like, hey, I'm really sorry. I had a lot going on, and I was just in my limit. I'm like, all right, that's fine. And we moved on, and it was great. But I think giving ourselves and other people the space to just show up. It's something that we don't do that often. And it's crazy to think, we have such high expectations for ourselves that I think we also forget how they impact those around us, even if, they're just ours and ours alone.
Yeah. I've been doing more, diving deeper into not just psychological safety, right? Which is what you create, but then the psychological autonomy I'm going to hang up on my manager right now because I'm at my limit and give in. And you gave her the safe space to be autonomous and be able to hang up on you without hard feelings at the end, just being curious, like, how are you today? I love that.
Yeah. And
it's a phenomenal thing.
I think that too is something that I've noticed since my diagnosis, maybe just because I'm more in tune and, to your point, I'm also trying to research things and look into it. But that psychological safety piece, I do think that looks different for neurodivergent, because I have learned, those big feelings and kind of that moral and ethical compass that everybody has one, but I think ours sometimes is just a bit more forefront in all of the decisions, and things that we're doing. And so when we're in a conversation and there's a red flag, we don't let go of the red flag. We hold on to it until the next red flag, and we start to collect that data. And I think that's something too that, as I've continued on this journey, being in spaces that were psychologically safe, doing things in spaces that were psychologically safe, and realizing that, that can't always be the forefront. And if it is, I might find myself in a space that I just am not fit for, whether or not that's, the outcome that I want it to be. And so I think that's something too that I'm just continuing to focus on. Because I've found too, in those relationships that I created, there was also that dynamic where we had that safe space with ourselves, kind of within our group, but having to also set the expectations with each other that was the safe space to come back to, within reason if we needed something. And, it couldn't always be projected out, which is unfortunate. But I do think that that's something that we miss the mark on as an industry too sometimes.
One of the big things I want to normalize out here and really talk about is, and I don't want to get too depressive, but at the same time, like, we go through a lot of struggles in the workplace. What are some of those things that you had to hide that no one would know about in the workplace that you just struggled with for a long time? Because I think one of the things you sort of touched on was some of the ethical and moral compass work that you've talked about before, about having to hide.
Yeah. that's a big one for me. And I think of all of the ones, again, that are the most impactful, I think that is the top of my list. And it comes down to, for me, I like to say that I'm ethical and try to be ethical in all areas of my life. But given kind of my own personal history and background and upbringing and, experiences, the treatment of not just myself, but those around me is super important. And so, even if it might not be the most psychologically safe place, I can tolerate it, unless people are treated in a way that just isn't ethical. And I've had to hide that for a while, in some positions that I was in. And it got to a point where, it drained my cup all the way. Even though I still had, dynamics and relationships that were really strong and really healthy, it was those ones that drained my cup to the point where I had to take a step back, because I couldn't go through my own day to day, because I knew that was still happening. The anxiety and the stress of, I might not see it today, but it could be, tomorrow or the next day, or it could be, one of my team members that goes through it next, or, another colleague. And it gets to a point where, you referenced earlier, you can't show up at home. And that's, kind of where I've found myself. And so I think that's a piece that I've really struggled with. And I've had to kind of, I don't even want to say hide, but almost suppress, because it's an active process. Like, it's an intentional choice.
Yes.
And yeah, I think the other thing too, for me, is I realized this year that it's okay to not be able to do that anymore, and to be able to take that step back. And I think I'm extremely grateful and fortunate, because I did have that psychologically safe space created. And because of that, for the first time in my life, I did take a step back and choose myself, which is not something I would ever, do in my former life. But because, again, the expectations, the need for everyone to like you, the need to be successful or to feel like you could do it, all of the unattainable goals we set for ourselves. And that was life-changing, for sure.
I agree. I call it like Pandora's box. Like, once you have that awareness of being in touch with who you are authentically, it's like, I can no longer accept myself to suppress that, right? It's like, there's strange unmasking moments that I have had, even recently, just having like realizations, and I'm years in, with like going to a restaurant, and there's lots of noise, and there's lots of different lighting, and there's hustle and bustle, people are moving around. And it was always one of those people that would go into a restaurant. My husband it would drive him crazy. And I would go into a restaurant, we eat, and I'm immediately like, okay, can we go? And I just thought, I'm like, I don't know. I'm bored. I thought I was bored sitting here. And so I'm at this restaurant over the weekend, and it happens again, right? I eat my food. I tend to be a fast eater, because in vet med, that's how we grew up, is like eating and looking at the microscope. And prior to all these great lunch breaks that we have nowadays, but like 20 years ago, they were non-existent. Anyway, so I sit there, and I'm like finished, and I'm like, I'm not actually bored. My family's talking, but I want out. Like, my kids are talking to me, and I can't help but like listen to my body at this point and go like, get out, get out, get out, get out. And I realized like the sound sensitivity for me was the real issue, not an issue, but it was the real crux of the reason that I get in, I do what I have to do, and I am out. Like, I don't want to sit at a restaurant and like chat for another 20, 30 minutes. But the sound sensitivity was really huge.
Honestly, for every person who has to turn the radio down to see where they're going, that's it, right? Every time.
Yes.
If the kids are talking, the radio's on, I can't figure something out, everybody has to be silent long enough for me to know where we're going.
We've all had that moment in the car, right? In the rain, and you like turn the radio down to like concentrate because it's raining out and you can barely see, or maybe it's snow or whatever the weather is. Yes, it's like turn the radio down and better concentrate. 100% what it is. And what we think it is, it's like, we think about the concentration, but we don't realize the sensory input is actually a bit overwhelming.
It is. But what's ironic is I also have times where that sensory input, the other day I was going through my daughter's dresser trying to find something, and my watch was hitting the dresser door. It was hot. The lighting was wrong. And all of a sudden I have my sweatshirt off. My watch is off. The window's open so I can see just to find it. But then at the same time, when I'm in focus mode, I have my AirPods in, my music on.
Yep.
And I need multiple things happening at the same time in order for me to be in the zone, which is, it's interesting to have that dynamic. Sometimes to focus, you need complete silence. Other times you need complete chaos. Where everyone else would be sensory overload. But
yeah, and then we're looked at like we're lying or we're not telling the truth, whatever the negativity comes at, because it's like, but you need utter quiet and then you need chaos noise. Like that doesn't make sense. Like, so the non-neurodivergent individuals do not understand the behavior at all. And then you're in a position where you get negative feedback. You have lost trust with your leaders, which happens to our teams all the time, because we have this bias that goes on of what normal looks like.
Yeah. And I think too, because we hold such high expectations for ourselves, that's something too, I think I've struggled with more recently in this last year. Is I need clear expectations, and that's not a job description. You know what the job is. You just need to know, as my leader, what are your expectations of me in this role? Yeah. And I never realized how different the interpretation of that question would be from someone who is neurodivergent to someone who is not. Now, granted, it was also not, again, really in a psychologically safe setting, but to be met with a response, because it's happened to me of, you've been doing this job for how long? Really, you should know what you're doing at this point. Or, if you don't know the job, then we need to, have a discussion. Yeah. And to be met with the job description, and the response is literally, careful what you wish for. And it's like, but I know the job. I know what the task is. I just need to know the expectations. And at that point, I've been through a handful of supervisors. And so, the expectations change from leader to leader, right? And the communication style is different. The wants, the approach, the needs are all different. And that was the first time that I'd ever been met with like just awestruck, response. And so I think that's something too that we don't realize. It's just interpreted different.
For me, there's a lot of nuance to the expectation, right? The job description being like the broad overview, and in the projects that you're put on or initiatives that you're running or whatever the goals are for the year. And then you have like a narrower side there later in which your direct leader expects from you in various different ways and roles. And I think that people, take them all into one and expect it to be in the job description. And I've seen colleagues, really great colleagues, who have tried to make their job description like 10 pages so that their expectations match all the goals, which match all of the high level. I'm like, no, the job description is not going to be the clarity that you need to do your job on the day-to-day detail level.
Yeah, no, that's going to be the 500 page manual. And honestly, even then, sometimes like there's going to be a situation that comes up and it's not there, but which is, it's funny in the role that I'm at now. I haven't counted the pages, but there's literally like a almost 500 page book of every scenario, step for step, word for word, which is incredible for my brain. Anytime I need to look it up, but it's, even then, to your point, you can write it all down, and it still isn't going to be the exact.
I'm curious because I used to be one that collected SOPs and created SOPs, right? And like you end up with a binder or digital binder, whatever, of all of these collection of standard operating procedures. And then what happens is I look at a binder or I look at this 500 page document online and I'm like, I am not reading that. like, yes,
the
I
control
need
F
it,
is my
but don't ask me to read.
Yeah.
So, all right. So since this show is not always about all of the pitfalls, like, and I love to expose and normalize those conversations. I think it's important, but are there ways in which you feel that your neurodivergence has helped you be where you are today?
Absolutely. And, fortunately, I hope the majority of the industry is moving away from that sink or swim or trial by fire model. But I do think, I do think it allowed me the ability to get myself where I am today. I come from a family who, out of my parents, my immediate family, I'm the first to graduate high school and the first to go to college. And so education was not something that always came easy. It was a struggle. And then I chose vet med, which also is not the easiest industry to be in. And so, it was always work, more so sometimes than those around me. But I think the ability to hyper focus and, whether it was scheduling my time to do so or just being able to really hone in on something and give it my undivided attention when I was in the space for it, I think really helped me, get where I am today. If you would have told me 5-10 years ago that I would be, in the position I am now, both personally and professionally, I would have laughed hysterically, because who has the time for that and or the organization? But somehow we're here. So I think that's a big one.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, I had my own business coach ask me, he's probably about a month ago, we were doing like end of year, it's like, what's your dream? And it really took me back a second. I was like, you know what? I'm sort of living my dream. When I was a kid, and we grew up in a very low income household. My father was disabled at a very young age, so he was on Medicare for most of his adult life. And then my stepmom was, she didn't have a college education. She was a secretary basically for a mechanic shop. And so we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and there was four of us kids, 2 adults in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, right? So it was a lot, and I completely derailed. So there goes the squirrel and the ADHD right there. Completely forgot what the point was. Anyway,
but you're living your dream, and I am
living the
too.
dream.
And you just, we never thought we would be to the point where we are. And I think now granted, we put in the work, but I think that drives, neurodivergency does give us, it gets you, my husband, who I'm not convinced isn't also ADHD. He hasn't taken me up on going to seek out diagnosis. But we were talking about it, and, he always is in this position. We're around the same age, and of comparing kind of, career fields and just kind of trajectory. And I was talking to him the one day, and I'm like, but it's not fair to you, because one, you started your choice of career that you're in now later than I did. And I wasn't functioning normally. I was functioning, unmedicated. So just essentially like a squirrel with a ping pong ball. But it was just a different speed for me. And so, there were other life events that contributed and put me into survival mode on top of the ADHD. But it's amazing to watch what can be accomplished because of your, neurodiversity. And that is the thing that I think people miss so often, and why it's not talked about enough, because everyone's afraid of that label. Honestly, it's a badge of honor. At the end of the day, that's how I look at it, because it's not wrong. It's just a different path. And it's interesting, even with my children, to kind of, our oldest does have ADHD as well, but to help her through things and teach her how her brain works for her. It's been an incredibly rewarding experience. And so, we're evolving, which is great, but it's a superpower. As much as it's a curse some days, it is a superpower as well.
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely feel like that. And I know that there's times where it just feels like a curse, like all day we've all had probably those years even.
Yeah. 2025.
But yeah. 2025 was a very interesting year for me. But yeah, it's, I remember going back for a second. I remember the dream I had as a kid was, or even as a young adult, like getting my own apartment and everything. And I remember going to the store and just saying, I just want to be able to walk in the grocery store and not have to count my pennies. Like, that's my dream. Like, I don't need to be a millionaire. I just want to be able to comfortable enough to walk in the grocery store and not have to worry about buying a snack or ice cream or like the things. And so, now to think about a dream beyond what I have feels so selfish. And I'm like, I'm good, right? So it was a good push for my business coach to be like, you can want and live and dream for higher now that you are where you are. And it was such a foreign concept to me. So one of my favorite questions to ask all of the guests here is, if you would want the world to know about your flavor, your style of neurodivergence, what would you want them to actually know about you?
Yeah, I think for me specifically, I may not always come across that way, just because I'm hyper focused and my face appears focused. Don't be afraid to approach somebody, myself or honestly others. I think there's so much context lost in the conversations we don't have, and so for me, I think my biggest piece is just adaptability and being open, and trying to also project that onto other people. Because I think that we also work in an industry that's pretty competitive, and I've learned with my neurodiversity to just use the pieces that I can use for good, and really highlight them. And I think that's one of them.
I love it. So if I condense that down, like, you're more approachable than you seem.
Yeah. I think sometimes we're just lost in thought. And, sometimes it's a productive lost in thought, but I think sometimes we miss the moments or the connections just because we're so deep in thought.
Yeah. I think I like that too, because I think about how often I'll just being at like BMX is coming up. We're recording this right before BMX, and it's coming up, and I'm like, I've been there, and I've been like the quiet one, and then people don't believe I'm quiet sometimes, and I'm like, I'm actually really quiet, and I'm in my head, right? Yeah. And so, like, I'm actually more approachable than I probably seem. I love that because I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think about when you're a kid, or even in college, when you get to the table first and you're like, who's going to sit next to me? You ever have that? Like, I think it's probably a little bit of a trauma response of like hypervigilance of like, who's actually going to sit next to me? And then I have like this rejection when it's like, oh, people are filling up around me before they fill up next to me. I'm like, what vibes am I putting off to make you feel like you can't sit next to me? What is that?
If you're so lost in thought.
Yeah.
You don't invite someone to come sit with you.
I'm lost in that thought.
You're lost in that thought.
Who's coming here? Who's going to sit here? Do they not? Does that person hate me over there? Like, that's, yeah. And there's probably 3 or 4 thoughts going on at the same time.
Meanwhile, you're missing the moment.
100% missing the moment. I love that. Oh, so awesome. So what big plans do you have coming up for the new year in 2026? Do you have any big goals for the year?
Yeah, I think balance is a big one. In my, motivation to do and to get things done and to meet my own expectations, I lost a lot of that balance over the last couple of years. And I am looking forward to just spending more intentional time, both with my family and just myself. Honestly, I think to your point, we set a goal and a dream and we achieve it. And then what? And I'm kind of stuck in that then what? Yeah, so I'm stuck in the then what. And so, I have a lot of things that I just want to reconnect with. And I have, some colleagues that are doing some really big things, and I'm excited to help them and support them through it, and be a participant in any way that I can. So just reconnecting, I think, is the big one for me this year. Yeah.
My big plans for 2026 is collaboration. Like that's my word of 2026, like collaboration. Like I want to meet interesting people doing interesting things. And like, if we collaborate, great. If not, I just want to be a thought partner and build a network of really interesting people doing interesting things. And that's how we connected. And so thank you. If there's anyone who wanted to reach out to you, find you after this podcast, what's your social media of choice? Everybody has their flavor, I feel like.
Yeah, I will say LinkedIn is probably the biggest one for me right now. In the future, may have some more professional pages outside of that, but I tend to keep it pretty private and keep the two separate because it helps me keep my balance. But LinkedIn is definitely the place to find me.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, telling your story, being vulnerable with me, having a laugh. And I just really appreciate you. And I look forward to maybe meeting you in person one day soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Left Unattended. A huge thank you to my guest, Jessica Poli, for sharing her stories. And of course, thank you, Dustin Bays, for editing and making sure this episode sounds as good as it feels. If today's conversation resonated with you, let's keep this connection going. Join my newsletter for weekly insights on neuro-inclusive leadership. That's synapt, that's syn-apt.me/newsletter. Learn more about coaching with me at coaching.synapt.me, and that's syn.apt.me. Finally, if you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps more people find these conversations and reminds the world that belonging isn't a luxury, it's a leadership strategy. I'm your host, Ron Sosa, and this has been Left Unattended. Until next time.